Arthur's Family Truth. The first thing I noticed was the sign. A white plastic board zip-tied to my porch railing, property under management. I looked up at my front door. New lock, different hardware, a camera above the frame I had never installed. I already had my key in my hand. I already knew it wasn't going to fit. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it ring. My name is Norman Lawson. I'm 64. I spent 35 years as chief accountant at an insurance company, and I know exactly how people hide things inside paperwork. I'm also a widower. My wife Carolyn passed 3 years ago. We bought that house in 1993, raised our son Russell in it. That house is worth $1.5 million today, and my son had decided it should be his before I was ready to give it. That was his mistake. After Carolyn died, Russell was attentive. I want to say that up front because it's true and because I think it matters. He called every few days. He came by on weekends. His wife Wanda brought food. Their son, Eddie, who was 4 at the time, kept the house from going completely quiet. For about a year, I thought we were handling it the right way as a family. I thought we were one of those families that pulls together instead of pulling apart. Then the conversation started shifting. It was slow at first. Russell sells residential real estate for a living, so he knows property values, he knows the market, and he knows how to talk about money without sounding like he's talking about money. He started mentioning casually that the neighborhood had appreciated a lot, that maintaining a house this size alone was a real burden, that there were some nice communities nearby for people my age, people with activities and neighbors and support staff if I ever needed it. He always framed it as concern. He was good at that. I told him I was fine. He kept coming back to it. Over the next year or so, the topic showed up in different shapes. Sometimes it was about practicality, property taxes, maintenance costs, the fact that I was sitting on an asset that wasn't working for me. Sometimes it was about health. He forwarded me an article about aging in place risks. He mentioned a friend whose father had slipped on ice and spent 2 months in rehab. Once, after a routine knee procedure, he came to the hospital with Wanda and Eddie. Sat across from me in the recovery room with this look on his face I can only describe as rehearsed sympathy, and told me that moments like this were a reminder that we all needed to think ahead. I remember watching Eddie push a toy truck along the floor next to my chair and thinking I was very tired of thinking ahead the way Russell wanted me to think ahead. Here's the thing about Russell. He doesn't come at things directly. He circles. He drops something into conversation between 2 other things, lets it sit there while you talk about something else, and then comes back to it a little closer than before. I had watched him do this with clients at dinner parties and always thought it was impressive. I found it considerably less impressive once I realized he was doing it to me. But at that point, I still thought it was just pushiness. A son being too eager to manage his father's affairs. I hadn't yet understood how far past asking he had already moved. I found that out the way I find out most things, by looking carefully at a piece of paper. About 2 years after Carolyn died, I was using the old laptop we used to share. I still kept it around for some archived files. I was emptying the trash folder when I noticed an email thread that hadn't been fully deleted. Russell had used that computer once about 6 months earlier when his phone died during a visit. He must have forgotten to clear the browser history. I opened the thread. It was between Russell and a man named Gary Holden, someone from his brokerage. They were discussing a property transfer, my property, and what they were discussing wasn't a future plan, it was already in motion. I closed the laptop and went and sat in the backyard for a while. Not long. Maybe 15 minutes, long enough to understand what I was looking at. Then I came inside and called my attorney. Judith Norris has handled my legal work for 18 years. She also processed Carolyn's estate after she passed, which means she knew exactly how that property was held, how it was titled, and what it was worth. When I called her that morning, I didn't go into detail on the phone. I just said I had something she needed to see and asked if I could come in the next day. She said yes. I showed up with a laptop and everything else I could pull together overnight. Old documents, a few things from Carolyn's estate file I had kept copies of, and a printed summary of what I'd read in that email thread. Judith read everything without saying much. She asked a few questions. Then she leaned back in her chair the way she does when she's organizing her thinking and looked at me. "Norman," she said, "if you call him today, the documents disappear and the story changes. You'll feel better for about 48 hours. Then you'll have nothing." I asked her what she recommended instead. She said, "We document everything first, change the legal structure of the property before Russell can act on it, and then say nothing. Let him think everything is normal. Let him keep moving. When he finally makes his move," she said, "there's nothing left for him to take. That's the kind of lawyer Judith is. I've never been more grateful for it. Here's what Russell was trying to do. An affidavit of survivorship is a real legal document. It's used when one spouse inherits a jointly held property after the other dies. Carolyn and I had owned the house as joint tenants with right of survivorship, which meant when she passed, full ownership transferred to me automatically. That was already done. That was already on record. What Russell and Gary Holden were working on was a forged version of a follow-up document, something that would make it look like I, as the surviving owner, had agreed to transfer interest in the property to Russell as part of a post-death estate settlement. It was dressed up in real legal language. If you didn't look carefully, it could pass. But it was a forgery, and the moment it got filed, it would be fraud. Judith and I got to work over the next 2 months. We quietly transferred the house into a single-member LLC, Lawson Family Holdings, legal, clean, and fast. Once that transfer was recorded at the county, the title Russell believed he was working with no longer existed in the form he thought it did. Any document he filed would reference a property that had already changed its ownership structure. His forged paperwork would bounce off a wall he didn't know was there. We did all of this without announcing anything, no changes to my routine, no sudden behavior around Russell. I still had him over for dinner. I still took his calls. He mentioned once, kind of offhand, that he had a colleague who specialized in private real estate arrangements for families in transition. I filed that away. He asked me once whether I'd updated my will since Carolyn passed. I told him I was working on it with Judith. That seemed to satisfy him for the time being. Around the same time, I had a proper security camera system installed on the house. When Russell noticed the cameras on his next visit, I told him the neighbors 2 streets down had a break-in, and I figured it was a good time to get set up. He nodded and said that was smart. He even looked up at one of the cameras and said it was a good angle. I didn't say anything to that, I just agreed. The cameras stored footage to a cloud server, 60 days of continuous recording, off-site, nothing stored locally in the house. If Russell ever thought about what those cameras might capture, he probably assumed the footage was sitting on a hard drive somewhere inside. It wasn't. About 6 weeks after the LLC transfer was finalized, Judith called me. She'd been making quiet inquiries through channels she preferred not to describe in detail. What she found was that Russell and Gary Holden had consulted with a residential title specialist, not Russell's regular commercial contacts, but someone new. There was paperwork being drafted, not filed yet, but in motion. I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot when she told me. I looked out the windshield at the line of trees along the street and just breathed for a minute. Then I asked her, how long before they move? Weeks, she said. Maybe a month or 2 if they're being careful. Then let's give them a reason to stop being careful, I said. That's when we came up with Denver. Judith thought it would help if Russell believed I was far away and distracted. A long trip, an old friend, a week out of town. My former colleague Clifford Merritt lives in Denver. We worked together for over a decade. I called him that evening, told him the full situation, and asked if I could come visit. He didn't hesitate. A week before I flew out, I called Russell. Kept it casual. Told him I was going to see Clifford, probably be gone about 8 days. Then I mentioned like it was an afterthought that I'd left a spare key with the Hendersons next door in case anything came up with the house while I was gone. I had not left a key with the Hendersons, but Russell didn't know that. I flew out on a Sunday morning. By the time my plane landed in Denver, Russell was already making plans. Clifford lives in a quiet neighborhood just outside Denver. Good man. We worked side by side for 11 years at the insurance company before he relocated, and he's one of those people who you cannot talk to for 6 months and then pick up right where you left off. I told him everything over dinner the first night. He listened, didn't interrupt, and when I finished, he just said, good, let him hang himself. That's Clifford. The days in Denver were calm. We drove out to Red Rocks one afternoon, cooked steaks 2 nights in a row, watched some baseball. On the surface, it looked like 2 old guys enjoying a visit. Underneath, I was waiting. Wednesday morning, I was sitting at Clifford's kitchen table with a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was Judith. They moved today, she said. I set the cup down. Russell and Gary Holden had gone to the house that morning. A locksmith had been called. The locks were changed, all exterior doors, front and back. A property under management, contact Clearfield Property Solutions sign was zip-tied to the porch railing, and by early afternoon they had attempted to file a property transfer document at the county recorder's office. The filing was rejected before close of business. The title they referenced in their paperwork didn't exist in the system anymore. Lawson Family Holdings LLC had been recorded weeks earlier. The county had no active individual title in my name to transfer. Their forged affidavit pointed at a property structure that was already gone. The whole thing bounced. They had changed the locks on a house they did not own and could not legally touch. I finished my coffee. I thanked Clifford. I booked a flight home for Thursday morning. I want to describe what it felt like standing on that porch the next afternoon, because it's the moment I keep coming back to. The sign on the railing. The new lock I couldn't open. The camera Russell had installed above the door, angled down at the entrance like he was already the landlord. My key in my hand useless, my phone buzzing in my jacket pocket. I knew it was him. He'd probably been watching the driveway on that camera, waiting for me to show up confused and rattled. I let it ring. I stood there long enough to take it all in. Then I walked around the side of the house to the garage and punched in the code. Russell hadn't thought about the garage. He'd changed every door lock on the house and forgotten that I'd had a keypad entry on the garage for 6 years. I went inside, put the coffee maker on, sat down at the kitchen table. Then I called him. He picked up on the third ring. "Dad, I thought you were still in Denver." "Just got back," I said. "Russell, what's going on? My key doesn't work." There was a pause. I could hear him on the other end deciding how to play it. He'd had a plan for this conversation. I could tell by how quickly he shifted into it. "Dad," he said, "I need you to listen to me. The house is gone. I know that's hard to hear, but it's done. It's for your own good. You shouldn't be in that place alone anymore. I handled it." I didn't say anything for a second. I actually smiled, not because it was funny, because after months of watching and waiting and saying nothing, hearing him say those words out loud meant that everything Judith and I had built was about to land exactly where we'd aimed it. "Okay," I said. "Thanks for letting me know." I hung up, I picked up my phone and sent Judith a text. 6 words, "They took the bait, file everything now." She had been waiting for exactly that message. By the time Russell showed up at the house 45 minutes later, Judith had already started filing. Russell came through the front door with the key to his new lock. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw me sitting at the table, hands around my mug, a folder of documents in front of me. He looked at the folder. Then he looked at my face. Whatever he had prepared to say on the drive over, he didn't say it. I told him to sit down. He sat. I walked him through what I knew. Not everything. Judith had told me exactly what to disclose and what to hold back for proceedings, but enough. I told him I'd found the email thread on the old laptop. I told him I knew about the affidavit of survivorship. I told him the house had been transferred into an LLC 2 months ago and that his filing had been rejected that afternoon because the title he was working from no longer existed. I told him there was security camera footage of every entry and exit stored on a server that was not in this house. Russell is quiet when he's cornered. He doesn't yell. He went very still and sat there listening, and I watched something move across his face. Not quite shame, not quite panic. Something in between. The look of a man who had planned for a lot of outcomes and not planned for this one. "Dad," he started. I held up my hand. "I don't need to know why," I said. "Whether it was business debt or you just decided this place should be yours on your schedule instead of mine, that's for the lawyers and the court to figure out. That's not my job." He didn't say anything. "My job," I said, "was to protect what Carolyn and I built. That's what I did. The legal process took 11 months. I'm not going to walk through all of it because some of it is still difficult to think about and some of it is honestly just tedious. What matters is the outcome." Gary Holden cooperated with investigators early. He gave a detailed account of the plan in exchange for reduced charges, who initiated it, when the forgery was drafted, what the timeline was, what Russell's role was in every step. That cooperation removed whatever room Russell had to argue his way around the evidence. Between Holden's account, the camera footage, the rejected filing, and the forged affidavit itself, there wasn't much left to dispute. Russell pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud. He received a conditional sentence, significant fines, community service, and a period of probation. No prison time. I want to be straightforward about that because I think people expect a story like this to end with someone behind bars, and that's not what happened. It's also not what I wanted. What I wanted was accountability. I wanted it documented on the public record, permanent, that this had been attempted, that it had failed, and that there were real consequences for it. That's what I got. Wanda filed for divorce 7 months after the charges were filed. She got primary custody of Eddie. She told me once, not long after everything settled, that she had tried to talk Russell out of it more than once and that she was sorry she hadn't done more. I told her I believed her, and I do. She's a good mother. Eddie is 7 now. I see him every other weekend and on holidays. Those are the best days I have. Russell and I have spoken a handful of times since the guilty plea. Short conversations, careful ones. I don't know what we are to each other now, and I've stopped trying to answer that quickly. It's a question I've learned to sit with rather than force. Some things don't have a clean resolution, and the sooner you accept that, the easier it gets to move forward anyway. I had his locksmith come out the week after everything wrapped up and restore my original hardware. Young guy, maybe 30, from a shop in town. He pulled out what Russell's locksmith had put in and looked at my original cylinder and said the old hardware was actually better quality than the replacement. Said it was satisfying work, putting things back the way they were supposed to be. I gave him a good tip. The house is still mine. The oak tree Carolyn and I planted on our 10th anniversary is nearly 30 feet tall now. Her handwriting is still on the garage door frame. Eddie's height marked at 1, 2, and 3 years old in blue marker, the same way she marked Russell's height on a door frame in the old apartment before we bought the house. Those marks are still there because I didn't let someone else decide what they were worth. I've had some time since then to think about what I'd say to someone who finds themselves in a version of this situation. Not the exact same situation, everyone's is different, but the general shape of it. Someone who suspects that a person they love is working around them instead of with them. Someone who is trying to decide whether to trust what they're seeing or talk themselves out of it. Here's what I'd say. Trust what you see. When someone starts framing your home as a burden and themselves as the solution, pay attention to that. That's not concern, that's positioning. There's a difference, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Don't let grief make you careless. After Carolyn died, I was not at my sharpest. I know that now in a way I didn't fully know it at the time. The people who wanted something from me knew it too. I got fortunate that my instincts kicked in before I was too far behind to catch up. Not everyone gets that chance. If you've lost someone recently and you're noticing people around you suddenly very interested in your finances or your property, that is not a coincidence. That is timing. Watch for the signs that someone is moving faster than their words. Russell never said outright that he wanted the house. He always framed it as helping me, simplifying things, thinking ahead. But his actions were already 3 steps past his words. The emails, the title specialist, the forged document in progress. If I had only been listening to what he said and not watching what he was doing, I would have been completely unprepared. Get a lawyer before you need one, not after. Judith knew my files. She knew Carolyn's estate. She knew the property structure going back years. When I walked into her office that morning, we didn't spend 2 weeks getting her up to speed. We started the same day. That speed mattered. If I had called a stranger and had to explain everything from scratch, we might have lost weeks we didn't have. And one more thing, because I think about this one the most. It is possible to love someone and still hold them accountable. Those 2 things are not in conflict. I loved Russell. I still do, in the complicated way you love someone after they've shown you something about themselves you cannot unsee. Loving him did not mean allowing what he tried to do to stand without consequences. It meant telling the truth about what happened clearly and completely and letting the consequences follow from that. That is not cruelty. It's the only kind of respect worth having for him, for myself, and for everything Carolyn and I spent our lives putting together. The oak tree is going to be something this fall. I can already see it from the kitchen window in the morning when I'm making coffee. Nearly 30 feet now, full canopy, the kind of tree that looks like it's always been there. Carolyn would have liked that. The house is still mine, and I'm still in it. Getting older doesn't make you a target. It makes you one only if you stop paying attention. I never stopped. If this story made you think twice about your own situation, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the best time to protect what you've built is before someone else decides to take it.